Hello, 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 hello. Beautiful people. Hello, beautiful people. Beautiful. You are so wonderful. You are so wonderful. Smooch, you love yourself. Wow, you beautiful people. I have one and two. One, this one. Fifth, this one, challenge.
Well, days after stating he intended to remain in the job, Victoria's Chief Police Commissioner has suddenly
This is the news. Don't forget this is the news. What I'm doing is the news episode of the news.
Well, days after stating he intended to remain in the job, Victoria's Chief Police Commissioner has suddenly stepped down. 87% of the state's officers delivered a no-confidence vote in Shane Patton's leadership on Friday. They are frustrated over a lack of progress on a new pay deal, together with a confluence of other issues plaguing the force. David Escort reports. After losing a vote of no confidence, Victoria's Police Commissioner Shane Patton was adamant he was still the person to lead the force.
I've grown up in this job. I love this job and all of the members in it. All I can say is, I hear their concerns. They're absolutely concerns of myself and the concerns of executive command and the command team, and we'll continue to do everything we can to address those issues, and I'll continue to lead the organisation.
That was Friday, but over the weekend something shifted, and by late Sunday his term was over. In a statement, he announced, "It is with a heavy heart that I've made this decision. However, I think it is the right one to allow fresh leadership in the role." It was an abrupt end to a lengthy career. Shane Patton joined the force as a cadet in 1978, working his way up to chief. But tensions with his 17,000 officers, inflamed by a long-running pay dispute, put his position under pressure. Former Victorian Police Commissioner Christine Nixon thought it was time for him to go.
I think his decision to step aside is right. I think it's an important step for the organisation and for him. It needs to clear the air.
Christine Nixon believes Shane Patton was swamped by the complexity of modern policing.
And I think the times we live in are so complicated and so much media, so much kind of discussion. And I think that's kind of where he's found himself over the weekend.
It comes at a time when community attitudes towards police are at a low. According to last year's Victoria Police Community Sentiment Survey, just 50% of those surveyed say they were satisfied with policing services, a massive fall from 73.1% the year before. That is despite, over the last year, police arresting the most people since 2005. On Friday, Victoria Police members voted overwhelmingly in favour of a motion of no confidence in Shane Patton, with 87% of the force backing the move. Victoria's Premier Jacinta Allen says the motion couldn't be ignored.
That was a message heard very clearly, and there were discussions over the weekend, and I think we can all appreciate, out of respect to the office of Chief Commissioner, we're just not going to canvass those confidential discussions.
But there's unlikely to be a quick fix, with a pending battle over the budget and unrest from officers over bail reform and the age of criminal responsibility. For now, Christine Nixon says it's important to focus on keeping the public's faith in police.
I think there's a whole range of people have to share this proportion of the blame. I think the government's got a portion of it. Shane has, and I also think the union as well is part of the whole process. And so you put all that together and you get what we've given today. But there is now a capacity to move forward. I think the members, and what's really important for me, for the community to know, is, members of Victoria Police turn up, they do the job, and they do it well, and they do it in the best they can.
Jacinta Allen also thanked Shane Patton for his service.
Victorians are kept safe by the thousands and thousands of men and women on the streets right now. And they deserve our backing, they deserve our support. They deserve to have their voices heard, they deserve to be listened to. And it is clear that they are looking for a fresh start.
Victoria's Emergency Management Commissioner, Rick Nugent, will take over the Police Commissioner's role as soon as is practicable until a permanent replacement is chosen. David Escort there.
Thank you. That was number one news. The next one, I'm gonna go 2, 3, 4. This one. Play.
Well, imagine going to work every day knowing there's a good chance you'll be assaulted. That's the reality for an increasing number of nurses in psychiatric hospitals. In Victoria, the number of these workers lodging injury compensation claims has almost quadrupled in the last 10 years. And as Natasha Shapova reports, they've joined experts in calling for better workplace protections. For Julie, going to work can be a nerve-wracking experience. We've changed her name to protect her identity. She's a nurse at a psychiatric ward at a Victorian children's hospital and says assaults from patients can happen almost on a daily basis.
I hate it. I hate coming into work. I get it's not even just an anxiety of what am I going to walk into, but it's an anger in me because I feel not supported by the service. One thing that really bothered me when I raised sort of a concern about not having enough support when we did have quite an aggressive young person being like, well, that's part of your job.
A couple of years ago, she had to take more than a month off work after being attacked by a child experiencing psychosis.
My face was bruised. So, it's awful. It's like really traumatizing. You sort of question yourself as a clinician, as like a nurse. And then also, I guess you question, like, do I really want to do this? Like, is it safe for me to come into work and do this?
Julie's experience is far from isolated. Safe Work Australia data shows the rate of workers' compensation claims for registered nurses nationally is 1.3 times higher than other occupations in the 5 years to 2022 to 23. The rate is even higher among nurses working in mental health wards, with the number of claims related to assault almost 3 times that of general nurses. In Victoria, it's also a growing problem. The number of injury claims made to WorkSafe Victoria by nurses in psychiatric hospitals has almost quadrupled since 2014. And Rebecca Sprekos from the Health and Community Services Union says there are many more cases that aren't reported.
Tolerance for violence and aggression becomes very high very quickly. Verbal aggression you may not even necessarily report because of the fact that you experience such varying degrees of violence and aggression that starts to feel like it's not as much of a problem.
Dr. Goise Mikolajczak is a researcher at the Australian National University's Global Institute for Women's Leadership. She says her research has revealed a lack of protection for these workers.
It's a bit of a grey area when it comes to protection from patients. There's a lot of regulation actually protecting the patients, which is great, but we realize it's not the other way around. So our question was like, who's protecting the employees in this case?
And who is protecting them?
I think they're lacking protection, and definitely it seems like the current culture is normalizing violence, but it also seems that in many cases workers are reluctant to report violence because they're concerned about repercussions for their job.
Dr. Mikolajczak says an increased need for care combined with understaffing and long waiting times was shown to increase violence from patients. She argues this can lead to a vicious cycle as more staff take time off due to assaults, causing further shortages and exacerbating the risk of violence. Rebecca Sprekos from the Health and Community Services Union says increasing the ratio between healthcare staff and patients would improve safety for all.
Time in the system comes from adequate staffing, so you have access to therapies and multidisciplinary team members.
A Department of Health spokesperson says individual health services and their boards have a legal responsibility for maintaining a safe workplace, but the department also works with health services to ensure they meet their obligations to their staff. For nurses like Julie, she wants to see better protections for health workers to ensure they can continue to do their jobs.
But it's really difficult to know how to manage this and then feel the staff getting really burnt out, feeling really disheartened. It's not why they came into mental health.
That's Victorian psychiatric nurse Julie ending that report by... French President Emmanuel Macron will host an emergency meeting with European leaders today to demand the United States not freeze out Europe with its plans to end the war in Ukraine. The United States is preparing to meet with Russian delegates in Saudi Arabia to begin the process. Ukraine says President Volodymyr Zelensky wasn't invited. The Paris meeting aims to outline clear action from Europe amid tension with the Trump administration. Kathleen O'Connor reports.
As the war in Ukraine grinds on, efforts to find a peaceful solution with Russia are ramping up. The Trump administration has become a key driver, but there's concern about how much input Ukraine is having. At a security conference in Munich over the weekend, US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, was asked whether Europe should be involved in the peace talks.
So the Europeans who have provided as much or more support than the Americans in this process, you don't think should be at the table directly. You think it should be two protagonists.
I said I'm a school of realism. I think that's not going to happen. But I said that's one of the reasons I'm up here talking to people. One of the reasons we're going out, we're doing it, to making sure that their positions are well known, that when we go into these positions, they're well stated. Part of the problem that we looked at when you looked at Minks too, there was a lot of people at the table that really had no ability to execute some type of peace process, and it failed miserably.
Top US officials are heading to Saudi Arabia for talks with Russia. Talks Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claims, like Europe, he also didn't get an invitation. Speaking in Florida, President Trump indicated the Ukrainian leader would still have a role to play.
Expect Zelensky to be involved in these conversations. What will his role be?
I do. He will be involved, yes.
Now European leaders are holding an emergency summit on Ukraine, led by French President Emmanuel Macron. The meeting in Paris will include heads of government of Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Poland, Spain, the Netherlands and Denmark, as well as the President of the European Council, the President of the European Commission and the Secretary General of NATO. Jean-Noël Barrot is the French Foreign Minister.
Le président de la République réunira les principaux pays.
The President of the Republic will bring together the main European nations tomorrow for discussions on European security. Those discussions did not come up as a reaction to whoever's declaration because, as I said last Wednesday, Europeans were gathered to talk about several subjects.
Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges is a former commanding general of the US Army Forces in Europe. He says since US President Donald Trump announced plans to end the war, there's been no clarity.
The last 72, 96 hours have been a whirlwind of mixed messages, some confusion, and frankly, a lot more uncertainty generated by all of that.
Ben Hodges says amid the uncertainty, European leaders must step up.
And now is the time for European leaders to start to be pounding the White House with their demands, with what their red lines are, because at the end of the day, Europe is going to end up having to deal with all the consequences.
Political scientist Daniela Schwarzer says there are conflicting messages coming out of the United States.
It is a demonstration of the new approach of the United States, which on the one hand is about pulling back from Europe and saying your security is your problem. And at the same time saying that the United States is an extremely important power and Donald Trump has made it his personal agenda to lead these negotiations.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly ruled out accepting a peace deal negotiated without Ukraine.
Kathleen O'Connor there. The Reserve Bank has begun its two-day meet as the country waits with bated breath over a potential rate cut. Since May 2022, there have been 13 rate hikes, helping to deliver the cost of living crisis being endured by most Australians. For households, a rate cut can't come soon enough, but with uncertainty clouding the global economy, is it the right time for an easing of monetary policy? Nick Grimm reports.
As Brisbane working mum Rebecca Evans sits in traffic on her daily commute, she has plenty of time to contemplate what she and her family could do with an interest rate cut.
Definitely a new car at some point in the future, but not right now. I would just say more it would be going towards like bills and just general maintenance and life.
But with most observers tipping a cut of 25 basis points to the cash rate, Rebecca Evans can't help but count on a significant boost to her household budget.
It would just mean like a little bit more money in our disposable income, I guess. It is very noticeable how expensive everything is.
If there was a rate cut, have you thought about how much extra money in your pocket that might mean, what you might be able to do with that money? Because a lot of people have been having to basically just do without a lot of treats that they once enjoyed.
Yeah, I guess it would be probably between $150 and $200 for us. I think we are really eager for some rate cuts as we would like to save that money to put towards a future renovation of our property. And obviously, as interest rates rose over the last 2 years, what
would have been deemed our savings is, to improve our home and make it a bit bigger for our family has been eaten up by interest.
But make no mistake, many Australians are at breaking point, desperate for anything that could help them make ends meet. Here's how Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie made the case to Sky News.
People are pretty miserable out there at the moment. To give them a little bit of hope, seriously, I don't think it's going to help them with their bills in that first couple of months a great deal. They're not going to notice it too much.
The federal government too leaving the RBA in no doubt. It firmly believes the time is right for a rate cut. Assistant Immigration Minister Matt Thistlethwaite says borrowers have been under immense strain.
70% of the population don't have a mortgage, so only 30%. It's a minority. And they're the ones that have done the hard yards over recent years. And they deserve our praise and our thanks because they've made the sacrifices. And because of their sacrifices, inflation has come down.
But others, like Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume, argue the RBA needs to tune out from the political and media pressure to cut.
Well, we're not going to be preempting the RBA's decision. In fact, muscling the RBA is something that a Labor government has done, but it's certainly not something that a coalition would do. What I will say, though, is that the average mortgage holder in Australia has paid an additional $50,000 a year on their mortgage under a Labor government. So no wonder they're crying out for relief.
And if the financial markets can be believed, that relief is all but locked in. Stephen Hamilton is an assistant professor of economics at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. and a former policy analyst at the Australian Treasury.
Look, markets yesterday said there's a 96% chance. It doesn't get much more certain than that. Put it this way, if they don't cut tomorrow, that will be a massive shock to the market. And I think the RBA would have to think carefully about its communication strategy going forward.
But even if a rate cut is an odds-on certainty, is it the right time to loosen monetary control in the face of a possible tariff trade war kicked off by US President Donald Trump?
A trade war, I think, has two effects. One, it has a negative effect on growth, and that would be positive for Australian inflation. On the other hand, obviously, to the extent it raises prices, it's going to have a negative effect on inflation. It's not really clear how those two things kind of net out. But to be honest, you could justify just about anything on the basis of this.
Steve Hamilton from George Washington University, ending that report by Nick Grimm. The Reserve Bank has begun its...
Okay, that was the news that I wanted to record on that. Yeah, we're having trouble with the bank. We can't borrow too much money, or, we get in trouble with the bank, loans. Okay, here goes the next bit.
A doctor for what?
The footage was shared across social media and stood down while police and the health department investigate. Today, Deborah Stone, the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Independent.
Is there like a... daily news? Can only watch one, not all of them. 11 minutes. Where is it?
This is a Triple J podcast. G'day, it's Dave Marchese with you for Hack. We hear a lot about right-wing extremism in the news, whether it's pictures of neo-Nazis marching through the streets of various capital cities or worries about radicalisation on social media. There have been inquiries. Authorities in Australia have even warned that a shocking number of young people are being caught up in this world. You ever thought what it would be like if it was one of your loved ones? Someone in your family, your cousin, your brother, your partner. they start hanging out with the wrong people, and all of a sudden they're bringing home a Nazi for dinner.
Oh yeah, that's what they were saying. Hanging around the wrong people, you're vulnerable. You're easy target, and you were hanging around the wrong people accidentally. You were doing this on purpose, and you weren't looking after who you pick or who you aren't, what the Nazi, who the criminal, who the jail, who whatever, and you weren't picking. If you don't pick and choose, you'll never have your mate. Get rid of the bad ones, get the good ones.
We start Googling and immediately find an article online about him being...
Because he's someone saying she's a slut, he's a cunt, he's a wanker. People like that, not in your life, please. Love, please.
The leader of this...
I love you, I'm intermixhector.
National Socialist Group for Queensland. He's like full-blown neo-Nazi. Like, holy shit.
It happens. It's so many people's experience in this country. So where do you go? And how do you stop it if you want to save your loved one from being caught up in this world? It's something investigative reporter Avani Dias has been exploring for months, and her story on the ABC's Four Corners is out this week. She's here now to unpack it. Avani, thank you very much for joining us. I guess the first question I have is, do we know how many of the people being radicalised in Australia are young people?
Well, the scary thing, Dave, is we're finding that people are getting younger and younger. More young people actually getting into extremism than ever before. So we've got these exclusive stats, and we found that 64% of people in these programs around Australia are under the age of 25. We've spoken to some people who've said they've seen cases of kids that are 12. So these are actual children getting into it, but they're teenagers, they're in their 20s. And so there's a lot of questions around why are these young people sort of in this really weird stage of life? They're trying to discover themselves. There's a lot of questions around why they're now getting so drawn into extremism.
So you've been speaking with the families of those who have been radicalised. Quickly, that's quite rare in itself, isn't it? Because it's not common for families to want to really go to the media and talk about this stuff. There's a lot of shame.
I know, and it's like, why would you, right? Like, why would you go on national TV and say, my kid got into neo-Nazism? It's not something you hear about ever. And a lot of families said, look, I'm really scared and really worried about how this is all playing out, but they just didn't really want to go out there.
One of the people you speak with is a woman named Emily. What happened with her son?
Dave, her story is so crazy. So, she has this teenage son. She was like, look, he was pretty grumpy when he was like 16. He used to be into standard stuff. He was into music. He was into the gym, but then he started sort of pulling away from the family, pulling away from his friends. The kind of red flag that she noticed was he started getting into this sort of offensive language, this really extreme racism, a lot of disrespect towards people around him. And then last year on Australia Day, her son had said, I'm going away with friends. I'm just going on this trip. She thought, okay, whatever. And then she turned on the news and she saw her son standing next to one of Australia's most prominent neo-Nazi leaders. Her son, he was wearing a mask and sunglasses. He was disguised, but she recognised him straight away. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is my son.
So does she understand how the recruitment happened? Like, what drew him in? Because we're seeing a lot of stories at the moment about fitness being one of the tools used by these groups to, indoctrinate young guys, especially. I know, like, over the weekend, there was this white supremacist training boot camp thing happening at a beach in Melbourne. Is that how she thinks her son got involved?
That's exactly it. And that training camp that we've seen photos of over the weekend, that's the same group that her son got involved in, the National Socialist Network. And she said that her son, he was looking for some sort of community. He was feeling a bit insecure. He was wanting to get into fitness and he was looking for someone to kind of become a part of, that sense of belonging, I guess, that we all want as young people, right? And then he came across the NSN during COVID. He went to a protest, he met them, and it was the gym, it was boxing, it was fitness wellness camps that really drew him in. And we've heard that from heaps of young guys who've joined these groups.
So, Av, how deep was Emily's son into this world?
Well, she found out after she started investigating. So he was hanging out at this sort of unofficial headquarters that the NSN has. It's just in this ordinary house in Melbourne. I've been out the front, and she said that there's Hitler portraits all over the house. There's Nazi memorabilia. Her worst fear as a mum was that her son's going to move into this house like some of the other guys that are living there. And she has managed to try to get him out through these sort of police programs that are running in Australia.
I want to get into some of that in a little bit. But first, you also spoke with a couple of brothers, Toby and Curtis. What can you tell us about Toby and Curtis and their sister?
Their story is so full on, Dave. So they are these two young guys. They're in their 20s. And they said they had found out their younger sister was dating a guy. She had started going to the gym a lot. She said that she was getting into his friendship group and was hanging out with these guys. They didn't really think too much of it. They were like, okay, fair enough. And then Christmas a year ago, she said, look, we're pretty serious now. I want to bring him home and meet everyone in the family. And then as soon as he walked in, Curtis, one of the brothers, he said he clocked it straight away. He saw his arm and it had this Nazi tattoo on it, a massive tattoo on his forearm. And he thought, who is this guy? And then they started Googling him and they found out that he was actually believed to be the leader of the Queensland chapter of the NSN. So he's super prominent. But Dave, things got really intense because then they found out that their sister had had a baby with this guy.
Wow.
And why that's really significant is because we've heard from leaders of the NSN that they now want to procreate and make this new white race. And Curtis, one of the brothers, he said to me, look, it's one thing getting your sister into it and seeing your sister being a part of this group, but a baby growing up around these ideals, not knowing anything different, that's what this group's now trying to do. And that's a really disturbing reality.
That's what they want, because that's what they're trying to do, is have more kids and children grow up around this ideology so that you don't question it.
So, do Curtis and Toby still speak with their sister?
They've stopped talking to her. They said that they've tried really hard to find help as well, but they just couldn't find anything online of what to do, how to help her. They said she's gone through a lot of different mental health issues through her life, and they struggled to get support for that when she was growing up as well. They just haven't managed to make contact.
What programs does the government have to deal with this? Like, is there a lot around in Australia to de-radicalise people and to stop them from getting in too deep?
So what these families have told us is once they find those signs and they say, okay, this is so full on, my loved one's into extremism, they've then tried to find what help there is. And we've tried to investigate that too. The main suggestion is to call the National Security Hotline. And so there's some families like Emily, the mum we were talking about earlier, she said she was so desperate she called police and it took 6 months of pushing to actually get her son into a program. But heaps of other families have said, I don't want to report my loved one to the police. I feel really weird about that. And so they're really reluctant because these aren't people who've committed terror attacks yet. They haven't done anything violent. They're joining these groups. They're getting into this ideology and they're saying, I don't want to go to police for that.
You spoke with one person, Matt Quinn, who's from a group called Exit Australia, which I'm guessing is all about the helping people who've been caught up and indoctrinated in these programs. This is what he had to say.
The government and the police need to realise that there's individuals out there that don't want to reach out to them as a first point of contact. A lot of them are come from conspiracy sort of anti-government backgrounds, and it's pretty unlikely that they're going to reach out to the government for help.
So is there a big risk as well that people will be drawn back in? Like, is that a fear that you've heard from families as well, Av?
Yeah, so Matt is is the only independent group that is actually providing this sort of support, and it's a really low-key situation that Matt's running. He's really overwhelmed. And so people are calling for more sort of independent other options that aren't just police and government. But yeah, people are getting drawn back in. Emily's son, for example, she got him into this program and then she found out a few months later he was still talking to guys in the NSN and they were saying, look, here's how you get independent, get your Medicare card, make sure you get your license, get out of your family home as soon as you turn 18.
Wow, so they're giving really practical advice on what to do and how to distance themselves from their families.
Yeah, and we found that they're often buddied up with another young guy in the group that sort of making sure that they're actually staying in the group. So it's really hard to get out in that situation, right? And we've heard it can take 3 years to even start changing your mindset around extremist ideologies. It's such a long process to get people out.
Have you heard from the government?
Dave, it's been so interesting because this area I've never actually seen as a journalist a part of Australian government that is so shrouded in secrecy. We've struggled to get stats and answers on a lot of these areas. The Prime Minister, the Home Affairs Minister, no one wanted to talk to us on camera about this.
Do we know why that is? Is it because, it might be a risk, outlining just how big of a problem this is?
Well, yeah, and a lot of police say there's confidentiality issues, but the reality is, Dave, it's a really sensitive issue, right? Terrorism is ultimately the end result of this if things aren't fixed. And that's a really difficult thing for authorities to come out and talk about. But what these people are saying is, look, you don't need to give us all the information, just give us access to that support. Families are saying there needs to be more early intervention, and the government said it's investing more than $106 million over 4 years into these early intervention programs. But Dave, there are no recent public reviews into these programs. We just don't know if they're working and if that money is being well spent.
What do you say, Av, to people who might be listening to this and going, oh, well, we shouldn't be giving this airtime at all or platforming these groups? That's what we're doing here if we're talking about it. How do you respond to that?
Dave, that's the reason why we focused on families. We are hearing from their perspectives specifically. In the past, we've heard from extremists, we've heard from former extremists. It's been really controversial, but we've never heard from families, and that's what we're doing tonight, giving them a platform.
Look, if you want to see more, the story is on Four Corners. You can catch it on YouTube, also on ABC iView. Investigative reporter Avani Dias, thank you very much for joining us on Hack.
Thanks, Dave.
And that's all for Hack for now. If you do want to stay across all of Hack's developments, remember you can go follow us on Instagram. All of our...
Okay, I'm trying to keep the link here or whatever it is. You gotta be with your friends, the ones you like or whatever you like or however you like it. And you gotta be with everybody. You gotta pick and choose. You gotta look into it. You gotta talk to it. You gotta say thank you to it. Thank you and I love you. All that. Behave. I'm intermixhector. This was the Australian news. Adios, amigos. It's happening. It's happening. God, love you.